With Al Horford and others prepping for Sunday's preseason debut against Luka, LeBron, and the Lakers, let's talk about the man who just stunningly acquired Horford, Melton, and Curry, all while dealing with endless contract negotiations with Jonathan Kuminga. Speaking of which, what made this offseason so unique for Golden State was the sheer unpredictability of the Kuminga standoff. Normally, a drawn-out negotiation with a key young player can paralyze a front office, especially because every decision becomes tied to that one outcome. Teams are wary of overcommitting money or roster spots when they don't know whether a large extension will hit their books. For the Dubs, it was even more delicate since Kuminga isn't just another player, he's a potential bridge into the next era once Stephen Curry eventually slows down. Any mishandling risked alienating a cornerstone while also damaging their short-term title window. Mike Dunleavy, however, treated the situation as an opportunity rather than a problem. He recognized that the media frenzy surrounding Kuminga's deal created a natural smokescreen. Headlines, leaks, and speculation all pointed toward Golden State being stuck, but while a lot of the basketball world assumed the Warriors were handcuffed, Dunleavy leaned into that perception, allowing it to distract attention away from the quieter, parallel moves he was orchestrating. In that sense, the Kuminga contract drama became less of a hindrance and more of a cover story, giving Dunleavy rare freedom to negotiate elsewhere without the glare of constant league-wide scrutiny. More on how Mike handled the Kuminga situation coming up. The timing of Dunleavy's maneuvers was every bit as important as the secrecy behind them, and that's what truly set him apart. In today's NBA, where front offices feel pressured to act within the first hours of free agency, panic spending is almost expected, with teams rushing to throw money at players in fear of being left behind and often ending up with bloated contracts or mismatched roster fits. Dunleavy, however, recognized that the first 48 hours of free agency act like a pressure cooker, with most franchises exhausting their cap space and trade assets almost immediately. Rather than joining the frenzy, he let the dust settle, using the chaos of early signings as cover while quietly maintaining back-channel conversations with Al Horford, D'Anthony Melton, and Seth Curry. What separated his approach from most executives was the willingness to delay any public action until the Warriors had at least some clarity on Jonathan Kuminga's contract situation, a decision that carried enormous risk because sitting on the sidelines can make a team look stagnant, plus test the patience of both fans and players. Yet Dunleavy trusted his read of the market, and by holding back, he preserved Golden State's full flexibility, ensuring that no rush deal would complicate the financial framework of Kuminga's extension. This was less about simply waiting and more about using silence as leverage, because every day that passed reduced the number of desperate suitors for the Warriors' targets, lowering the risk of a bidding war and allowing Golden State to structure contracts on their own terms. When the Warriors finally struck, their deals looked clean, measured, and perfectly timed to catch rivals off guard, as other executives had already burned through their resources, leaving little competition. What initially looked like inactivity turned into a carefully orchestrated strike, and the brilliance wasn't just in who he signed, but in how he weaponized timing itself, turning perceived risk into an undeniable advantage that safeguarded the Warriors' roster balance and long-term flexibility. Another part of Dunleavy's genius was his ability to sell the Warriors' vision without overselling it. A lot of teams rely purely on financial incentives to lure veterans, but Golden State's pitch was rooted in legacy and role definition. Dunleavy made it clear to veterans like Horford, Melton, and Curry that joining Golden State wasn't just another contract. It was an opportunity to be part of a story much bigger than themselves. Playing with Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green at this stage of their careers carries symbolic weight, and Dunleavy leaned on that history. At the same time, he made the roles tangible. Horford was pitched as the missing piece to stabilize the frontcourt rotation. Melton was pitched as the defensive glue guy who could restore the guard rotation to elite status, and Seth Curry was pitched as the sniper to help Golden State elevate their three-point efficiency ranking. By presenting the Warriors not as a short-term stop, but as a place where these players' skill sets would be maximized and their careers extended, Dunleavy created buy-in. This wasn't about squeezing a few more checks out of the league, it was about cementing legacies in an organization known for doing right by vets. Contract design around Jonathan Kuminga became the defining move of Dunleavy's offseason, and it's where he showed the sharpest edge as a negotiator. Instead of letting Kuminga walk into restricted free agency with only a qualifying offer on the table, a path that would have given Jonathan more control and potentially opened the door for other teams to force Golden State's hand, Dunleavy secured a 2-year deal with team control built into the second season. That subtle shift completely changed the dynamics of the Warriors' future because it gave the franchise breathing room and leverage without pushing Kuminga into a long, rigid contract. From the team's perspective, it was the ideal middle ground. Kuminga gets short-term security and the chance to revisit the market soon, while the Warriors get protection against both financial overcommitment and the possibility of losing him outright for nothing. For Dunleavy, it wasn't just about the number, but about structuring the years in a way that fit the Warriors' broader timeline, especially with Steph Curry entering the final stretch of his prime and the organization needing roster adaptability year by year. By locking in team control, Golden State also preserved trade flexibility as the contract itself becomes a more movable asset instead of a potential liability. Few executives could have pulled off that balance, because it required convincing Kuminga and his camp that shorter-term control wouldn't hinder his long-term earnings while simultaneously keeping the Warriors protected. In a summer defined by quiet patience and behind-the-scenes leverage, this move stood as the clearest example that Dunleavy was operating with a strategic vision far beyond just plugging holes. He was actively shaping the team's future financial map while still keeping his young forward invested in the present. The communication side of this offseason deserves equal credit. It's one thing to negotiate contracts, it's another to keep veterans patient during weeks of uncertainty while the Kuminga situation played out. Dunleavy and his staff maintained constant, clear communication with their targets, making sure no one felt like a backup plan or an afterthought. They provided detailed breakdowns of how these players would be used in Steve Kerr's system, even using film examples to show exactly where shots would come from or how rotations would be adjusted to highlight their strengths. This gave the veterans the confidence that they weren't just filler pieces but integral parts of a thought-out system. For Horford, that meant being shown exactly how his passing from the elbow would create looks for Steph. For Melton, it was seeing film of how his defensive versatility could free up Jimmy and allow Draymond to conserve energy. For Seth, it was the promise of lineups where he and Steph could play off one another to weaponize spacing, even if it's only for a short spurt in the game. By being proactive in communication, Dunleavy made sure these players never felt left in limbo despite the long wait caused by the Kuminga negotiations. One of the more underrated elements of Dunleavy's offseason was his manipulation of perception. Around the league, rival GMs assumed the Warriors were too bogged down in Kuminga's extension to make real moves. Dunleavy knew that once teams saw Golden State as immobile, they would stop monitoring the Warriors as active players in the market. That created the exact environment he wanted: less competition, less bidding, and less attention. By the time Golden State pulled the trigger on multiple signings, rival front offices were flat-footed. They hadn't prepared counteroffers because they didn't see the Warriors as a threat in free agency. Instead of rushing to prove that the team was active, he let the league believe Golden State was paralyzed, and then struck swiftly once everything was aligned. The understated nature of this offseason also deserves to be emphasized. Most GMs aim for splashy moves to create headlines and prove they're doing their jobs. Dunleavy went the other way. He understood that the Warriors didn't need a superstar overhaul, they needed surgical additions to complement their aging core while maintaining long-term flexibility. His refusal to chase headlines or force trades demonstrated both humility and clarity of vision. He wasn't trying to win July press conferences, he was trying to win games in April, May, and June of 2026. By the time the dust settled, Golden State had quietly addressed every one of their weak spots without ever appearing desperate or reckless. In many ways, this is what championship-level roster building looks like: not flashy, not loud, but precise, calculated, and fit-driven. In the end, Mike Dunleavy's work this offseason will be remembered less for the individual signings and more for the process behind them. He turned an unprecedented situation, being a public contract standoff with Kuminga, into a protective shield that gave him the freedom to negotiate quietly. He balanced patience with preparation, communication with discipline, and risk with flexibility. While the rest of the league thought Golden State was handcuffed, Dunleavy was quietly constructing a plan that would leave the Warriors deeper, smarter, and better positioned for both the present and the future. For fans, it's proof that the front office has the ability to navigate turbulence without losing sight of the bigger picture. For rivals, it's a reminder that even when the Warriors appear vulnerable, their leadership knows how to turn chaos into control.